Hello, I'm Anderson Smith, and the course is Introduction to Psychology as a Science. Today we're going to discuss the psychology pretest that you took. If you haven't taken the pretest yet, stop the video, go take it, and come back, because we're going to talk about the results of that test. By the way, the pretest will not count in your grade. It's just to show you that we can take a test in psychology, even though we haven't had the course yet, simply because we've been studying behavior in the mind all of our lives, interacting with people, trying to understand and predict behavior. Now, the pretest was an example to show you that we can distinguish between the myths about behavior that we learn from our experience and the facts about behavior that's based on scientific study by psychologists. Now let's go to the test. The first true-false statement was the right side of the brain is creative while the left side is analytical. There's a lot of pop psychology talking about left brain and right brain, and it is true that the two hemispheres of the brain are lateralized. That is, some things happen on the left side, like language, and some things happen on the right side, like spatial abilities. But when you come to complex kinds of behaviors, like creativity or analytic decision-making, the whole brain is involved. They're not lateralized. So there's no really truth in the notion of being left-brained or right-brained. So it's false. The second one was psychologists study behavior in the mind, but not biology. Well, if we study the mind, how can we not study the brain, where it all takes place? So there's a lot of interest among cognitive neuropsychologists to understand how the brain translates into behavior and how the mind works. In fact, with some of the techniques that we'll talk about later, this is one of the most exciting times for psychologists who are biopsychologists. It's false. To see an object more clearly at night, look directly at it, focusing the object on the most sensitive part of the eye, the retina, the fovea. It is true, the fovea is the most sensitive part of the eye. It contains cones, however, and cones require high light intensity. Cones are the receptor cells that receive color information. And that's why we see bright colors and bright light. But at night, we don't see bright colors because the cones, which require high levels of light, are the ones that see color. So actually, you shouldn't focus it right on the fovea, which you would get if you just looked directly at an object. You should look just away from the object. So now you're focusing the object on the rods, which are located outside of the fovea, and you can see it better. So again, false. 4, a person who is blind in one eye cannot see depth and therefore cannot fly an airplane. It is true that if you only use one eye, you lose some very important depth perception cues, but there are plenty of depth perception cues left in monocular vision, as we'll see when we talk about depth perception later. So it's not true that you lose all depth perception when you don't have two eyes. False. The fifth one was some people don't dream. Well, in fact, everybody dreams. It occurs during REM sleep. We all experience REM sleep. If you don't think you dream, it means you don't wake up when you're dreaming. I've seen examples of people that think they don't dream. They go into a sleep laboratory. Then you wake them when they're experiencing REM sleep. And I wave my hand because in REM sleep, the eyes sort of jiggle around under the eyelids, and they will report a dream. If they fall asleep, when you wake up again, you might remember that you dreamed or not. Sometimes you have to show them a film before they'll believe they actually reported a dream. False. Number 6, punishment is called negative reinforcement. No, punishment is applying a negative stimulus to remove a behavior. Negative reinforcement is apply a positive stimulus to keep a behavior from occurring. So reinforcement is different from punishment. Punishment is an attempt to lead to extinction of a behavior. False. All memory declines with adult aging. No, in fact, one kind of memory called semantic memory, or world knowledge, continues to increase well into late adulthood, into the 70s. It's world knowledge. It's information that you learn, but you don't remember where or how you learned it. What does decline is episodic memory, the memory that about your internal diary, remembering things that happened to you in the past. That does decline with aging. Semantic memory does not. So it's not true that all memory declines with aging. Number 8 was, in order to be creative, one must have high levels of intelligence. Well, you have to be intelligent, but you do not have to have high levels of intelligence. Creativity is not correlated with intelligence to a great extent. False. Genius is related to mental illness. Well, even though movies like The Beautiful Mind talk about people who are very smart and also have psychotic behavior, There is no correlation between intelligence and psychoses or mental illness. False. The more motivated and aroused you are, the better your performance will be. False, because there's actually a inverted U-shaped function. Motivation and arousal will lead to better behavior up to a certain level of motivation and arousal. Then as arousal and motivation continues to increase, performance will go down. So it's an inverted U-shaped function. It's not a linear function based on motivation and arousal. Number 11, much of human behavior is instinctive. No, we have very few instinctive behaviors. There are some reflexes that young infants have, like, for example, the reflex to suck if you put something in their mouth, or if you tickle the bottom of their feet, the toes will spread out. Those are reflexes that go away as the child gets older. We certainly have genetic predispositions to do things in a certain way, but instinct, species-specific behaviors that lower animals have are very rare in human behavior. We only use about 20% of our brain at any one time. Well, false. The brain is active at all times. Different parts of the brain might be more active than others, but the brain is actually charged fully all the time. Shock treatment is now used for people with severe anxiety, number 13. No, shock treatment is a treatment method that's used only for the people who are very, very psychotic, usually with very severe depression. It's not used for anxiety disorders, even if it's severe. False. To better control behavior, reinforcement should be applied consistently every time the behavior occurs. False. In fact, behavior is controlled better if you only use partial reinforcement. We'll talk about schedules of reinforcement, how you can schedule reinforcement to produce very high levels of behavior. But if you reinforce it every time, it leads to a pretty low performance rate increase. 15, a person with schizophrenia has a split personality. No, split personality is called a dissociative disorder, and there's some controversy about whether that dissociative disorders actually even exist or not. Schizophrenia is severe psychosis where the person is sort of separated themselves from reality. They have their own reality, so not the fact that you have different personalities. Number 16, opposite types of people attract each other. In fact, if you look at attraction in humans, there tend to be more likes than opposites in terms of attraction. False. 17, psychologists are trained to be therapists. Well, I was not trained to be a therapist, and certainly that's the last thing I'd want to attempt, because I'm not trained to do that. Psychology is a very broad field, and it has many different types. Some of them psychologists are trained to be therapists, others are not. False. Old people become senile if they live long enough. Well, senile, I assume you mean something like Alzheimer's disease or severe dementia. And in fact, senile dementia is a disease. It occurs only in a fraction of the people, no matter how old they are. In fact, people that are very, very old, like centenarians, tend to be fairly cognitively intact. They're sort of survivors if they live to be 105 or 110. False. 19, people who threaten suicide are rarely the ones who commit suicide. Again, false. We ought to take threats of suicide very seriously and make sure that people are talking about suicide get professional help, because they are probable to commit suicide. And then the last one, most cases of color blindness can be cured by diet. Cases of color blindness are due to deficits in certain kinds of cones, and diet doesn't really help that. So eating carrots might help your vision, but it won't cure color blindness. False. So what we've done is we've shown that even though we answered those questions on the pretest, sometimes they're just not the accurate depiction of what behavior in the mind is really all about. So there are lots of myths, and this course is intended to help solve those myths and give you the facts based on science of what psychology is about, how behavior and the mind work. Thank you.